Okay, I believe the stream is transferring over to YouTube. They'll let us know in the chat soon. We have quite the quorum today, 45 of us. Thank you everyone for showing up. I believe that you have the agenda. I will share it in the chat. Cool. We are going to go ahead and get started. We'll start with testing updates. I'm going to give a brief on what I've been up to, and Proto Lambda will give a brief on what he's been up to. Continuing to add, just on the PyTest of the executable spec, as we've been adding features, as we've been updating, as we've been modifying and fixing bugs, I've just been kind of adding testing that pass through the general flows, the general expected expectations, and kind of like sanity check passes. And through that, we've been finding a number of small bugs, which most will just make it into the next release, probably on the order of week and a half from now. Okay, cool. It looks like Proto will not be here for the next maybe 10 minutes or so, and we can come back to him. Proto Lambda is now, at least for the next chunk of time, going to be working full-time on testing infrastructure, and consensus testing between the Python executable spec and this Go executable spec that he's been working on. And through that, and also kind of increase the sophistication of testing on the towards fuzzing and more randomized inputs. And we expect a whole host of awesome little bugs to fall out in the next few weeks because of that. There's a few modifications to some of the structures of stuff, and I'll wait till Proto gets here and he can give us an update about that. So we'll slot him in right after client updates. Someone remind me if I forget. Okay, so let's go to client updates. How about we start with parity today?
So we passed all the state tests from the repo, and right now we are mostly just trying to do refactoring and trying to integrate that new runtime back to our existing runtime to do the integration. So that's for us.
Awesome. And are those the 051 tests?
It passed several days ago, so I think it's the 050 test.
Okay.
And yeah.
Cool. That's very exciting. I think maybe you're the first to integrate those tests successfully. Congrats. Okay. And Proto, we're going to do your testing update right after the client updates. See, you joined. How about Lighthouse?
Rust up first. So we had a big week, actually, a big fortnight. So we've been syncing blocks across the network using Rust Loop P2P, which is pretty cool. We're on spec 0.5.0. We're doing block propagation via Gossip Sub. We're using a slightly modified version of Matt Slipper's protocol. We need to hoist our network deserialization up in the stack, so we had to make a couple little shortcuts to make it work, but we'll be trying to get a bit closer to that actual spec, the Y protocol, that is. The validator client's coming along well. We're using a testing tool to produce blocks at the moment, but we'll switch over to the proper validator client later this week. So that means we should be running a short-lived private single client testnet in the next couple of days, which is pretty cool. We're also working to pass state transition vectors, and we found that slow tree hashes has been really inhibiting us from operating smoothly. So we're a couple of days into a case tree hash implementation, and we should have something in the coming couple of days. It's pretty close. And finally, we're looking to swap from GPL2 to Apache 2. Yeah, that's it for us.
Great, thank you. How about Lodestar?
Hey, sorry, couldn't find Zoom. We've also had a pretty big week. We were about to PR in like our first kind of rough plumbing of validator client, and we're really close to being able to actually just kind of spin up what we hope would be a similar to like a single client situation, processing blocks and whatnot. And then we're going to move to try and get that spun up in multiple Lodestar clients. But other than that, it's pretty much where we're at.
Great, thank you. How about Pegasus?
Hey everyone, sorry, my laptop froze. I'm on mobile. So our beacon chain visualizer beacon chain is talking live to the Artemis client. We are processing attestations correctly during both block and epoch processing, and thus finalizing blocks and epochs. Artemis is up to date with version 0.4 of the spec and version 0.2 of the Hobbit Spire protocol. We're currently working on implementing RPC methods for request block routes, request block headers, and request block bodies. And we're hoping to be running on a white block test net within the next week or so.
Great, very exciting. PyVM Trinity.
Hi. So last 2 weeks, basically the general normal spacing of version 051, and also some the beacon chain testnet on the dev P2P network layer is keep on progress. And also with the research team, we released the deposit contract of V051 as well. So yeah, that's our updates. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And just a quick update on that. The deposit contract repo, from now on, will have releases cut simultaneously with the main release. So if the API or anything changes on that end, you can more sanely version those together. Great, thank you. Let's see, Nimbus.
Hi. So it was a very big past 2 weeks. Lots of work was done. On the crypto front, we updated to the latest BLS and the test vectors from last week. On the spec front, we implemented 0.5.1, added more logging to help for debugging. We have state pruning pending. We also optimized lots of low-hanging fruits because the processing was so slow that it didn't fit into a slot. And for testnet, we even switched to 30-second slots for a time. And we also started to integrate the new state tests. So first step was loading the YAML validator and deposit config to be able to generate a Genesis state from it. So that's done. And then the next step is loading the full beacon state from the YAML file and compare the hashes of both. Regarding bug fixes, we had some networking and underflow bug fixes, and we raised the potential spec bug during the Genesis epoch processing just this morning. Also, we implemented, we changed our timers implementation in our async framework because we had some clock drift during simulation. And regarding libp2p, we did some architecture research, but for now, for simulation, we will stay on RLPX because it's more solid. And the big news is that we started a development private testnet on AWS this week with instruction in the blog post and in our repo. And we reached out to non-Nimbus status colleagues and a couple of people in our Jitter channel and they managed to install, run the client, connect, and sync to our private testnet successfully. So right now we're just are running out onboarding, And we have a couple of issues to solve regarding NAT traversals and peer connectivity, like low ID, high ID, if people remember from Emul and Academia times. And we should have something to show at larger scale soon. But if you're interested, please contact us.
Great. How about Harmony?
We did some consensus layer optimizations, like cache pop keys of validators and cache shuffling. Some other obvious and obvious caches were added. Also did a slight refactor and improvements in the simulator, so now it runs a bit faster. Finished work on the BOS, SSD, and shuffling test suites. And now working on consensus tests, already passing a few of them. There is also work in progress on SSD redesign. Actually, it was originated by incremental hashing implementation. So we're gonna refactor it and add incremental hash and also align with the latest SSD spec updates. Also been working on updating spec to version 0.051. This work is almost done. Encountered several issues with crosslink processing. I'm trying to make some rework of that part of the spec. Actually, I did some, but not sure that this is the best way of doing that. Actually, going to open a pull request and maybe discuss it there. So that's it on our side.
Great. Thank you. How about Prismatic?
Hey guys, so we've been doing a lot of work on our public sort of testnet. We have the full cluster running. It's able to like survive restarts. We constantly restart it though, as we're upgrading and adding more bug fixes. We have a bunch of like strong monitoring and spanning tools to check out what's going on. People can join in from the outside and sync up with the network. And we use Goerli for the deposit contract and for incoming validator deposits pretty much. Yeah, we're using LMD Ghost, and there's only a few more bugs to fix. And like post chain start validator activation, we get some like weird race conditions and requesting assignments. But aside from that, like, yeah, we just want to leave this running for, make sure they can run for many days, do a little bit more stress testing, and then have some more people try it out before we go out into the wild. But yeah, things are getting pretty close. We've just been in like debugging hell. We were like, had a bug for like 2 weeks where we didn't know what was going on, and it was because we were passing in the, we were not passing in the justified state to LMD Ghost. But Terrence here from our team was able to figure that out, and now things are pretty good so far. So yeah, hopefully very soon.
Great. Thank you. Yeeth. Is anybody here from Yeeth? Cool. Like I said, we're going to go back to testing when we finish clients. Proto, I gave a brief on what I've been working on and that you're going to be spending a lot of time on testing over the coming weeks. Can you give an update on what's going on your end?
Testing and like test generators, fuzzing, the Go executable spec, all this other stuff. And lately I've been pushing to implement the change that merges the test generators with the spec. And so you can use the PySpec, the Pythonized specification in your test generators. And basically derive tests from the spec itself. It's like a huge step forward to have more YML tests.
Great, thank you. And Yannick, I believe you were looking into doing some work on getting the SSC and hash tree vectors up. Is that on your radar? Is that something you're working on?
Yes, I've just opened a PR this morning with an update for the SSE tests. They should be up to date now and should also be more useful than the previous version because it's just more complete. There are now tests for all types, not only integers. But unfortunately, it will take a while to get this merged because yeah, first the migration to the spec repo, and also it depends on some stuff in the Python SSE library that hasn't been merged yet, and therefore the auto test generation doesn't work. But you can try it out. I uploaded them or generated them manually and put them into a GitHub gist. I posted the link in the chat. So yeah, you can try them if you want. And yeah, now working on tree hashing.
Great.
That's it.
Excellent. Thank you.
So just to be clear, the Ethereum test generators repo will be removed and everything will be generated from the Ethereum 2 spec repo. So spec updates will also be tested and will have a test generated automatically.
Yes. The CI for the testing of the spec and the test generation are going to live much more closely to each other now that the spec is executable, to kind of keep that flow simple.
Just posted a link or like the issue number of the PR of the new change.
Right, that's PR 851. Cool. Anything else on testing before we move on? Specifically consensus testing. Okay. Next up, research updates. Keep this relatively brief.
In general, there's been tons of simplifications of the spec. A bunch of them in phase 0. I think a latest one is regarding the withdrawal process, which is both kind of a better design and simpler. And I think we also have a better design and a simpler design by removing the exponential backoff mechanism that we had in phase 0. The other good news is that we're making progress on phase 1. So phase 1 as a spec will be split into 2 parts. Part number 1 will basically specify the shard blocks and the structure of the blocks and the structure of the attestations in the shards and the fork choice rule. And then in a separate document, there will basically be updates to the beacon chain regarding the custody game. And one of the cool things is that the custody game has been simplified, and it's now, my guess is that the whole thing fits in 256 lines of code. So it's very nice and simple and readable. And so we're kind of going through all the edge cases and trying to make it super solid. And my guess is that we'll be able to finalize the phase 1 spec not too far after finalizing the phase 0 spec.
Excellent. Any other research updates?
Do I go with the networking stuff, or is it for later?
We have networking slotted right after this, so you can start that one off after we finish this.
Yeah. I mean, I think on my side, it's basically the simplifications that Justin just mentioned. So I just recently put up a PR for replacing the withdrawal queue with an exit queue.
Cool.
On Pegasus side, just a quick update to say that most of the applied research team will be in EdCon, and it's probably that we'll have a draft ready of handle protocol by then.
Great. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to networking, and Felix, you can start us off.
Yeah, sorry, I have to catch a train, so I have to pop out right after this. So the so the ENR spec is through the E process, so it was accepted in the last all coders meeting. So we're gonna move the spec over to the DevPDP repo, and I'll try to get some people to actually implement it now that we've sort of formally accepted it.
And on the Diskify side, what we've done is we kind of solved this packet signature problem I was talking about last time. So just a brief recap. So there was this issue where basically if you have multiple nodes using different sort of crypto systems for their node identity, then the big question was how they could authenticate each other's packets. And in the GitHub issue, there's now, looks like we have a pretty good solution using HMAC to verify authenticity of the packets. And right now I am implementing that, so I don't have any code to share yet for the implementation, but it is progressing. And we've also updated the specs quite a bit. And on the ETH1 side, we've actually sort of moved all the ETH1 related specs to the DevPDP repo, so they're really all in one place now. And on the side, I've also been working on an EEP to get ENR support into the RLPX specs, so that will be an EEP for RLPX version 6, but it's not super high priority, so it might actually take like a month or more to finalize that one. Okay, so that's it from my side.
Awesome. Thank you. Any questions on that before Felix has to go? Okay. Next up, we'll talk about the network spec that lives in the repo. There was obviously a ton of discussion and likely to be a ton more discussion. But given that we kind of at least have the general framework, I merged it last night. And from now on, we'll address things via issues and subsequent PRs that are smaller, more digestible. Matt, do you have any specific update you want to give on that?
Nope, just that the first thing I'll do to update that particular PR is split it apart and add some description around the broadcast side. So we've got our PC. I still need to write about the broadcast side, and then I'll move on to a couple other specs too.
Great, thank you. Zach and anyone that's been doing some work with Whiteblock, do you have any updates for us?
We've been working with Artemis, and we're also working with Lodestar. I agree with what you're kind of said in what we said in the on GitHub about single client test nets, getting the clients to talk to one another before working on any interoperability type of tests. So that's kind of what we're focusing on. And after we get Lodestar talking to Lodestar, Artemis talking to Artemis, then we'll get them to talk to each other. There's no particular timeline on that. If Matt Elder has anything to say, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, so me and Antoine finalized the Hobbit 0.2 spec. We just stripped it down to basically just an envelope format, so it's agnostic to anything else that's going on in the community. It's just sort of like a scaffold until libp2p is there sort of thing. And that's all I really got to say. So anyone wants to use Hobbit 0.2, it's not changing anymore. So yeah.
Great, thank you. And Raul from Protocol Labs is here today. Raul, do you have any updates for us?
So not really a strong update, just business as usual on our side. I'm working today to finalize our discuss.libp2p.io forums. We are creating an area for implementers and contributors so that we can better serve any questions and engage discussions and so on. Right now, those discussions are kind of split across many venues, and I think that putting them on there will help the rest of the libp2p team to participate and in general the libp2p community. So once this is set up, I hope to finish with this today. I'll make an announcement on your GitHub channel.
Great, thank you. Anything other on the networking side? I have slotted to talk about just testnets and progress in that, or a couple of agenda items later. Okay. Piper is here today to update us on his work with regard to doing some modifications to simple serialize to make it more friendly to indexing. Piper?
Cool. This is pull request 787 in the Eth2.0 specs repo, if anybody wants to look at it while I talk about it. So this is updating the SSZ serialization spec to include an offset-based mechanism that was originally proposed by Peter from the Go Ethereum team. This makes essentially dynamically looking up data within a serialized objects have it's constantly fast. It's I believe O log n or something along those lines for index lookups. It also actually reduces the overall serialized size of SSZ objects by a small amount, essentially just by ditching a length prefix, and in general seems like a better format for serializing and makes this format more useful for being able to reason about objects within contexts like the EVM or other resource constrained areas. And I am not 100% sure on this last one, but my intuition says that this also works as a viable ABI encoding for smart contracts, which would give us essentially a unified encoding format for how we send objects across the network, how we encode objects for consensus data, and how we communicate objects into things like smart contracts. We, in general, there seems to be some like consensus around adopting this as the update to what SSZ serialization looks like. Be interested to get other people's feedback for or against in that pull request, or here if you have questions that you'd like to ask me. And I think the plan would be for this to take effect in 1 or 2 releases of the ETH 2.0 spec. So not something that would be dropped in immediately, but that once we have general, unless anybody objects strongly, that sort of thing, to include this as part of a spec update within the next, I would say 1 or 2 releases, but that's a very fuzzy number. One thing that was proposed and that we generally, I think, have rejected is including a length prefix. And the intent behind that was to have some sort of forwards compatibility and the ability to have extra fields be added to objects and still have them be somewhat backwards compatible. And this was rejected essentially just because it adds ambiguity to the serialized representation of these things. And that ambiguity can have a number of like unknown consequences down the road. So we opted or are leaning towards a very strict set of rules for serializing objects, so that there is exactly one way to serialize any given object.
Great, thank you, Piper. Are there questions about this proposal?
And for any context, it took me about a day at the upper end to update the Python implementation of SSC to this spec. So while it's while it changes the layout and format of serialization, the actual updates to changing the code that does this were relatively straightforward.
I like it, and I think it's cool.
I like it also. I just wanted to ask about alignment. Are we going to do something about that, or are we going to let it be packed?
I am not sure that I understand your question.
So basically, a lot of these fixed length formats, they tend to align fields to to their own size, such that when you read it, say using mmap or from flash memory, you don't have to worry about misalignment issues. So basically what you do is that you pad things like booleans to a slightly larger size, just to make it easier to use on certain kinds of hardware.
This is something that's outside of my expertise, and so I don't think I'm qualified to comment on it, but I'd be happy to look into this. Maybe you could open up an issue or something, kind of discussing this. My initial reflex is that padding things out further decreases or just essentially bloats object sizes, and that I have some resistance to that initially, but also I'm not working on extremely resource constrained devices. So I don't have, this isn't a problem that I'm familiar with.
All right, I'll give it some more thought and then we can take it to an issue. Certainly not a blocker. It's a very nice proposal.
Great, thank you. Anything else related to this, related to serialization, etc., before we move on? Okay, thank you. The next thing I have in there is testnet progress, roadmap, project management, etc. Mikera brought up, proposed bringing in the cat herders to potentially help us as we are moving towards more public testnets. I did leave my, at least, opinion in the current time in GitHub, which is there's 3 things before anyone should be dealing with multi-client testnets. 1, do you have a long-standing client testnet of your own? Can it withstand itself? 2, is it targeting, if it's going to be speaking to another client, is it targeting the same exact version of the spec? And 3, if targeting that version, is it passing a set of consensus tests? And the asterisk on 3 is actually that even if you're targeting 051 right now, those consensus tests are very much sanity tests. They're very much, they pass through a handful of common flows. They don't handle very exceptional or interesting cases. So even if you're passing 051 and you're both passing 051, you're ready to talk to each other, cool, get ready for some issues because those test vectors are not super robust, and we expect to find a number of bugs in the next couple of weeks. I'm resistant to, I know people are very excited and want to have multi-client testnets. I don't want this to be an accidental waste of time where we, a week from now, try to get a bunch of clients talking to each other and burn a week or 2 in this effort because the specs, the testing, etc., are not quite ready as a scaffolding to support this. That said, we do have some of the cat herders here today, and I'm excited to have y'all, and excited hopefully y'all can kind of continue to be here and continue to embed in our processes. But welcome. I'll give you a chance to speak, you and Mikera and anyone else who wants to speak now.
Well, I'm not a cat herder. I just asked for any of the interested cat herders to come to the call, just see how they are. Since they have some learning to do, I just figured I'd invite them over to the call.
Sweet. And again, I'm excited to have y'all. Cat herders, I know you've begun to do some work on the 1.0 chain stuff. Can you just give us a briefing on what your MO is and y'all's processes?
Right now, we are not actually working on some Eth1 stuff. I joined the call today to understand the requirement for Eth2.0 work over here. We are helping mostly with the hard fork thing, the upcoming Istanbul hard fork, and would be happy to help if we can do anything about the PM stuff which is required here in multi-client testnet stuff. So it's just the introductory one and trying to understand the requirement.
Great. So the requirements from my perspective are, and the way I see things progressing at this point are for people to, I know there are a number of simulations and private test nets that are being worked on right now. Private as in single client and internal, not exposed to outside users. As these mature over the coming month to 2 months, I do expect clients that are targeting the same version and do have a robust implementations to begin maybe communicating one-on-one. And beginning to be aware of those processes and kind of figuring out what's going on that and figuring out the pain points on these one-on-one client test nets, or maybe will help inform us on how best we structure a larger scale multi-client test net. Ultimately, the idea is to have a multi-client test net, long-lived, that targets a single specific version that we invite people from the community to participate in. I imagine we'll go through a number of these. I've also, if you haven't checked out, Cosmos did a handful of experiments called Game of Stakes, where they had people join and try to kind of break some of the economic considerations of the test nets and gamify the test nets and gamify the participation. So maybe doing some of that down the line is also something we're interested in. So I think at this point, just kind of beginning to maybe have some conversations and be embedded in the process will allow us to make a plan over the coming months.
Sounds great.
Hey, Danny, this is Lane. Just,
Hey, Lane.
I agree with everything Pooja said. I just wanted to jump in and add one quick thought, which is, the cat herders was set up as sort of a community resource, right? So it's a group of about 10 experienced project managers who have very kindly volunteered their time to help out with whatever needs help, right? So I just wanted to say as well that if any team feels that even internally they could use a hand with project management, organizing tasks, or any of that stuff, they should feel free to reach out to any of the herders at any time.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. So we have these, I guess, kind of larger group goals, but individually there could be some help there. Thank you.
I had a question. Is it meaningful to have a testnet before libp2p?
I personally want to see the TTP on a testnet. I think that you're going to run into some issues with respect to gossiping large amounts of data, especially when you hit a reasonable amount of validators. There's probably a number of processes, a number of paths, and if people are eager to have things communicate, I don't know. I lean in the direction of getting libp2p ready before we have multi-client testnets, but I'm sure that's debatable.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to disagree. I think it's really important that we, whatever you use, whether it's Hobbits or something like that, just to like kind of get some flow going on like the low end, because that way you can actually, you'll be able to see where, these pain points, and we can figure out what issues we have even on syncing or just running whatever multiple nodes together, multiple different clients. I think it's super important. Like if libp2p is a blocker right now, for instance, for us, it's a huge blocker because the JS side is just not there, and we're working on it. Switching to something like Hobbits just to get like some clients testing together is like very important, because then we can figure out where the issues are and if there are any issues when down the road.
Fair. Any other thoughts, comments, questions with respect to testnet's project management and the general flow over the coming months? Again, my expectation is in terms of like something more orchestrated amongst all clients, that is not something in the next month or two, but that these one-on-one experiments will potentially be valuable and that you should coordinate amongst yourselves.
This is Amin. Just
Amin?
had a question. libPDP is only a blocker for the clients implementing in the languages that don't already have good libraries for it, right?
Yes, and there's also a daemon available that a couple of clients are beginning to use. And so between either getting that libPDP native implementation up to snuff or getting kind of the daemon integrated into their flows, that's the blocker. I believe on the Go side and Rust side, things are stable and currently being used internally. And then on the Python side, we have some bindings that we've put in place, embedded, and there's also, I think, a libPDP native implementation being worked on right now. JS side, there is some work. Looks like Raul said there's some work being done on the gossip sub side, which is kind of this complicated component. Apparently, Adrian was telling me it's kind of a beast to code up. And Java side, is there an update? Is there any native Java implementation right now?
I know
So
Connor
from-
Svensson has been working on the Java implementation, but I don't think any progress has been made on that.
Right.
He actually provided an update. So it sounded like they're able to spin up a basic host or peer and get it to communicate, with some JavaScript examples. So I guess he was communicating Java to JavaScript. He says that he'll provide kind of more of an update, I guess at the end of this week, which I guess would be today or tomorrow. But he says they're pretty close to having some basic functionality going. So I think that that applies to Artemis and Harmony. And so if the Harmony guys know anything else, they might be it might be good to ask as well.
Oh, it looks like Ivalo's mic is out, but yeah, he agrees with the libP2P Java update. Have there been any experimentation with integrating the daemon in Java, or are y'all bypassing that and just going for the native implementation in a little bit later in the time horizon?
Yeah, we're just gonna go with the native Java implementation. We're fairly confident that we could do the testing we need with the basic Hobbits implementation, and then when it's time to, we'll just establish just kind of like an interface to abstract that away, and when it's time to switch to libP2P, it should be fairly easy. I mean, nothing's ever easy, but easy enough.
I learn that every day.
Yeah.
Regarding libP2P on Rust, I just had a quick question. So, has anyone considered wrapping that in a CFFI, so that way it could be bindings could be created for the Rust version?
Yeah, I actually kind of supported that that methodology, because it would be kind of cool to to have bindings for whatever language wants to use libP2P, and you don't have to wait for that native implementation. However, the Web3j guys graciously jumped in and said that they were already planning on doing a Java implementation. So it kind of removed the necessity for us to do that, at least from a Java side. But honestly, I think that would be a cool thing going forward, just so I mean, that would help, like, I guess, NIM or some of the other
Well, I'm
languages.
just thinking of all the scripting languages like Ruby
Yeah.
and like whatever, dude. And it's like, how long is it going to take for them to do native implementation? But if they can just do some C bindings to the
Yeah.
rest implementation.
Yeah, we talked to Raul quite a bit
Yeah.
about that.
By the way, I completely agree with you guys. There is experimentation on this ground. There has been some previous experimentation, and as well, I know that Pierre from Rust P2P has been also experimenting with combining down to WASM and running in a browser. So different runtime modes and different runtime deployment modes and so on is something that I would personally be very keen to explore with you guys.
From the Nimbus team in general, we also had this question about how to move on with lib-p2p. We choose first to use the Go daemon, so now that's working, and we also have on the side a lib-p2p in pure NIM implementation that is going on. Though for testing right now, we are using RLPX. And regarding wrapping Rust with a C interface, that's something that we ask ourselves a lot of time for first BLS, because Zcash is done in Rust as well, and there is no the C library for BLS. Well, there was Milagro and stuff, but that was a question. And there is also lib-p2p. So at one point we thought, yeah, so how? What about having some kind of automatic wrapper for Rust library to C, so that we can use them in NIM or direct Rust to NIM, but it's always through C. But still nothing.
So what I would suggest is if somebody can spearhead this and open an issue in Rust lib-p2p in the Rust lib-p2p GitHub, then that would get the discussion flowing.
Cool. Someone do that.
Also, one thing that we've been struggling with for lib-p2p implementation is that regarding the spec, basically it's the Go implementation that is the spec right now. Well, we have to follow Go, potentially Go bugs, compared to having a proper spec. But the lib-p2p team is working on that. I'm not sure about the state of the Rust implementation with regard to the Go, if it's in sync or not.
Yeah, so the Rust and the Go implementations interoperate well, and in fact, we have had past successes in this regard. So that's complete. And then regarding the specs, we definitely are aware of this. We aim to be a specs first project. We have made progress in some critical specs like peer IDs and so on, where a few elements that were small warts in the specs have shown up, and we're trying to iron those out. And as we go forward, we will continue building out or retroactively speccing parts of the system to make them available to you guys, so that you don't have to always refer to a specific implementation. In parallel, we're also writing, or if you check out docs.lib-p2p.io, that is already taking form, and there are sections that are already filled with content. This has been done progressively, so it's more user-facing documentation, so to speak. But I think that would be useful for some people in this call as well to get acquainted and get familiar with some of the concepts. And as well, a third track that we are working on is an implementer's guide. So basically, a one manual for people who are spearheading an implementation of lib-p2p to have a single reference about, from the viewpoint of an implementer, what exactly you need to know. What are the ongoing discussions for each particular element? For example, multi-stream 2.0, what we expect to change in the future, where it's happening with cross-references to GitHub issues, pull requests, and so on, so that you have kind of like one canonical walkthrough that you can use to thread everything together. That's it's taking a while because the daily hustle and bustle consumes us in this project, but and particularly me. But hopefully it will be ready pretty soon. And I've been saying this for a few weeks already, but hopefully it will come really soon.
Cool. Thank you.
Regarding the P2P Java option, we are still considering as a temporal option making a Java binding for the P2P daemon. This would work in a case if the P2P would be a blocker for us. I mean, the pure Java implementation of the P2P. And this is something that could be crafted in a reasonable amount of time.
I just want to say, agree with Mikhail that if it's a temporary solution for the very first cross-client testnet, so let's use the Go libppt daemon, and that would probably solve a lot of our time in the context of syncing the native implementation bugs, in my opinion.
Okay, so it sounds like everyone at least has one or two potential paths forward, depending on how native implementations and other things shake out. I feel like we jump back to libp2p. Anything else related to libp2p? Obviously, Raul is an awesome resource. Thank you, Raul, for being here again. Anything else on this before we move on? Okay. General spec discussion. I have something. So I found, I think, a bug related to some Genesis stuff, the way we're doing it, and I think maybe another bug was reported yesterday related to this. I, over the past week, have been leaning back in the direction of moving towards Genesis slot 0 and putting in explicit boundary conditions. This became a little bit more appealing to me now that we have testing and now that we have an executable spec, so these become a little bit simpler to integrate into the spec. So I'm going to do an exploratory PR to see just the change in complexity from moving back to Genesis slot 0. If we do, I'm sure all of you can say, told you so. So anyway, expect at least either a PR on that or an explanation on why I think the PR wasn't worth it in the next couple of days. And I see in the chat, everyone's very excited. That's what I have on the spec stuff. There have been, at least the stuff that's going to come out in 06, there are a few decent changes that are like radically simplifying, which is super exciting. I'm thinking probably in the week and a half that we will get that out. Greg asks, is you can drop UINT 64? No. Anyway, sorry. You need to serialize this UINT 64. That's all, Greg. That's all I need from you.
I know.
Okay, cool. Other just spec-related stuff? Cool. I'm generally kind of keeping my head in all of y'all's progress as looking at repos and following conversations. It's super exciting to see stuff come together.
So one thing on the spec is we might / probably will split off the fork choice rule for phase 0 in a separate document. And we also want to make the fork choice rule executable.
Yeah. Yeah, and that the idea to, well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons to make it executable, but we can generate test vectors off of it, which is pretty cool.
In doing that, we would really appreciate what we talked about a little bit earlier, which was basically invariants that are upheld throughout the spec. Like in our testing, we have a pretty shoddy network setup, which is good because we hit a lot of issues, and in particular, we hit a lot of deep reorgs, which and then it's fairly expensive to switch forks unless you can make certain assumptions about things being, stable in the state. So it would be very nice. Like those kind of invariants will really help, and
yeah,
I guess Ghost is part of that.
I just made a notes doc for these invariants, and I'm going to request that people on the research and spec team, when they think of them, to write them there, and then once we compile them, we'll get them into the repo.
Nice.
I can actually, I'm going to segment the doc into invariants that we explicitly are writing, and then the second section is if you think you know an invariant and have a question, you can drop it in there and we'll confirm.
That's fair.
Cool. Let's see. So a number of us are going to be meeting in person in Sydney on the 9th. And the general topics, and I wanted to put these out here in case I've missed something glaringly obvious that we should be getting together, is we're going to have 3 breakouts in the morning. I have 2 breakouts in the afternoon right now, but I'd like to make it 3. So phase 2 /WASM /data execution, networking, testing, light clients, and test nets. Is there anything immediately that comes to mind that I'm missing that would be worthwhile to slot some time for and break out for? And if not, if you can't think of something right now, message me.
For those that cannot go to Australia, would it be possible to film the report?
Yes, and we are attempting right now to figure out a good remote participation strategy where these breakouts will have some sort of call-in capability. Still to be determined, but
the time zone is a bit an issue.
I know, yeah. So I'm not expecting mass participation, but this, if we do provide this, then we'll obviously be recording these breakouts as well. Cool. I suppose networking maybe in the morning could be focused on more of the networking protocols and things we need to work through there, whereas maybe in the afternoon we could, if there's maybe some value in extending that and talking about network aggregation strategies and things like that. I know the handle guys will be there. We'll feel it out. Okay. We're at an hour. Pretty quick meeting today. Just general open discussion, anything on people's minds, things that we need to work through, chat about, just want to give us notification.
Regarding the invariant documents, I think it would be helpful if it's structured like invariants during slot processing, invariants during epoch processing, because otherwise it's just constants.
Gotcha. I'm writing, I'm going to split that doc up into some logical sections. We'll add fork choice too. Okay, anything else, guys? guess it's a short meeting because everyone has so much shit to work on. Cool. Thank you, everyone. Good meeting, productive. Again, super exciting to see all the progress. People have been kind of, I'm definitely continuing to be a resource. Like if you run into some weird bugs or like some weird spec stuff, like please just hit me up. Because I can probably save you some time, or sometimes I can save you some time. Cool. Thanks, guys. Are we in Sydney in 2 weeks? Maybe. Probably meeting in 2 weeks. I'll let you all know. Thank you. Take care. See you a bunch of y'all in Sydney.
Everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Hey, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.